Joined now by Will Prochaska, who's a Strategy Director at Gambling with Lives. Will, thank you very much for joining us. What do you make of these proposals? Do they go far enough in your view?
Well, we'll have to wait and see what's actually announced. If the proposals that Katie details in her piece there come through, I think it will represent an enormous winning of the argument by people on the side of reform who have worked extremely hard since the last Gambling Act was published many years ago. But the devil will be in the detail. Whether or not these reforms actually prevent the harm that we want to see prevented will depend on the Gambling Commission's ability to actually enforce any new rules, and they'll depend on levels of affordability checks. For example, whether affordability checks are placed at something which will be preventative, or whether the industry wins the next argument and manages to get affordability checks at something which will be astronomical. So really, I think the government's publication of the white paper, which is now imminent, will be the start of the next battle rather than the end of the story. And certainly at Gambling with Lives, the charity which I represent, and the families who are bereaved by gambling-related suicide, we see this as just the start of a process to try and make sure that in the future we have no deaths from gambling-related suicide in the UK.
The regulations, as we're discussing them, would appear to concentrate very much on the financial impact that gambling can have. What more would you want to see in terms of the health impacts that gambling can have as well? Because we know, as you said, it can destroy lives.
I'm glad you raised it, because I think a lot of the coverage on the BBC today has overly focused on the financial harm, and that actually plays very much in the industry's territory. So the industry would like to frame the harm that's caused by its products around the financial harm, people's debts, etc. But actually gambling-related harm starts with a mental health crisis and it ends with a mental health crisis. So gambling in its modern incarnation poses a real threat to people's mental health. We're talking about very repetitive, very dangerous, very addictive games. Some of the games actually have higher addiction rates than heroin. So the fact that these products are even allowed on the market is a sign that we're probably talking about not quite the type of regulations that we all want to see down the line. At the moment, we're trying to limit the harm that these products cause. There's a very good argument to say that in the future we need to think about this as a health harm, and to think about whether we should be allowing products which are such an obvious risk to people's mental health to be allowed on the market in their current form, in the current environments which are so dangerous.
What about advertising? What's the evidence around that? Because you do see quite a lot of adverts on TV still.
We see far too many adverts on TV, as well as direct marketing by the industry, particularly targeted at young people, and at their growth markets. We saw there that now 30% of people going through the NHS clinics are women, and that's because the industry has decided that women are a growth market. So we know that advertising is the start of a route into harm. The industry have fought that tooth and nail and have tried to claim that there's no link between advertising and the harm that their products cause, which is surprising because they spend £1.5 billion advertising every year. And of course they know that generates an awful lot of profit, and there is a correlation between the scale of their profit and the scale of the harm in the UK. So we would like to see an end to all gambling advertising. The industry in its current form is an irresponsible industry with really dangerous products, and it's not one which should be allowed to be stimulated. In the future, if the industry were able to show that it was acting responsibly and that its products were safe, then I think advertising should be considered again. But at the moment, we'd like to see an end to all advertising. It's a pity it doesn't sound like the government's going to go that far and they're going to come up with some sort of negotiated compromise solution. But at least we will have won the argument that gambling advertising is in itself harmful and it leads to harm. And from there, we will start the fight to make sure that we protect people from that in the future.
It is, of course, a perfectly legitimate pastime if you want to engage in it. Will Prochaska from Gambling with Lives, thank you very much for joining us. Well, if you've been affected by any of the issues raised, you can find organisations offering help and support on the BBC Action Line website. Just search bbc.co.uk/Action Line.